Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this right now. Just before we get going, obviously you'll notice there's a third person here this week. This is Adam Sherriff-Scott. Just to give a little bit of context, Adam is a big tennis fan. He is a fan of Manchester United, even though we don't hold that against him. And of course, why he's here today, he is our, practice lead and senior vice president of the industrial team, covering really all of Toronto on an industrial basis. And what we thought we would do today is, Mike and I have talked a lot about office over the last 2 or 3 months when we've been doing this. And one of the questions we got is, well, what's happening outside the office market? And I guess just to give people context, as of filming today, we have been locked down for now 6 months. Mm-hmm. Or I guess we should say we have been in a COVID world for 6 months. It's 6 months tomorrow that the NBA shut down and Tom Hanks announced that he had coronavirus, which was really, that was the day it all hit.
That was a tough day for Matt. Really tough day for Matt.
That was the day it hit the fan. And here we are 6 months later. We're, as you can see with Mike, we are making it back to the office a little bit, which has been really nice. Hey, Mike?
Yeah. We had a full team meeting just a moment ago. It's been great. We don't want to just be office guys. We are office guys. We want to bring our listeners and our viewers a more holistic view of the real estate market, what be pertinent to them, which in this case is industrial. And what'll be really interesting here is the contrast of what the office market's been doing and what we've been talking to you about for the past number of months now, compared to what industrial's doing, which sounds like it's going pretty well. So we'll let Adam dive into that in a moment.
It's a good segue, guys. I'm coming to you from my home as well, and we've all been locked down for 6 months. We really just had a bit of a COVID pause on the industrial side. All of my clients, certainly in the back of they've been working right through this. A lot of them were deemed essential services. So, I was at a building today and they've been ticking along, manufacturing and production. Again, it was really a COVID pause, maybe, I joke, I got a bit of a long weekend, that weekend in March, people weren't really sure what was going to happen. And then things just kept moving along. So when you think about it, I've been visiting, people on site for the last 6 months, even though I've been working from the confines of my basement and living room. So it's been an interesting contrast in that regard, because things didn't really stop, in our world. They were going at record pace, record speed, pre-COVID. There was a bit of a pause, and we're starting to sort of get back to those pre-COVID levels now in terms of activity and
so Adam,
velocity
so just for our listeners out there again, can you maybe here's what we'll do. Can you set the market? Where were we going into March 10th or March 11th, whatever that day was? Sure. Mike and I have done that. I think the downtown office leasing at that date was at 1.9% vacant. We're 6 months later, we're only up to 3.2, which is still incredibly low, but is almost, what is that, 60-70% more than it was 6 months ago. So maybe just set the tone on where we were 6 months ago, what we've seen over the last 6 months, where we are today.
It's a great point, Matt. And you know what I mean? We're at the same levels. We were down almost to 1.2% vacancy, in the first quarter, which is, again, record lows. That's effectively no vacancy. And our average asking rents, were well, across all industrial classes are broaching the double digit, the $10 mark. They're about nine. I think they were about 9.90 at that point. So, yes, did things fall? Our vacancy rate skyrocketed to 1.3% from 1.2, and that was basically a building was, a fairly large building was delivered to the market, which has subsequently been leased. So I have a feeling we'll be back down to that 1.2% come the third quarter. But
that's crazy. We've been telling our viewers how tight the office market's been leading up to COVID and how Toronto's been the hottest office market in the world. It wasn't even the hottest market in Toronto. Industrial was the hottest market in Toronto.
Yeah, no, and it's we were sort of just quietly. There's just so much pent up demand, guys. And this is it's a couple of things. Obviously, e-commerce is driving that. People were buying a lot online. I think what COVID has done is that's just accelerated that. I read a study recently that said that we've now hit sort of 2022, 2023 numbers in terms of, buying online. So we were going to get there, and e-commerce was driving that, but, it just, people were sitting around a lot more at home and at that time to their house. And I think we've seen new things spring up in COVID. I mean, one of the big verticals that's been extremely active in the last 6 months for us is obviously food related. People who were sort of, and I was an early adopter on this. We got our groceries twice a week, through different carriers from different major grocery chains. That became very popular. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but a lot of the major chains started really pushing their at-home delivery or even their parking lot delivery. So they're reevaluating their supply chain. And that's really what it comes down to is how are goods getting to the stores, or how are goods getting to the consumers? And when the stores were locked down, there was a shift. We had a client that does household, cleaning products, and I was on a call with their head of supply chain, and he predicted something like this, 2 years ago, and they were already in the process at the end of last year of revamping their supply chain, taking control of their supply chain, not using a third-party logistics carrier, and basically we're now out in the market looking for a large warehouse for them. But again, a good example of just trying to sort of plan for an uncertain future. And I think that, again, we're all expecting to consume more, and we'd all like that done and delivered to our front door. So that's really impacted us.
So in terms of this, because this is a really interesting topic that you're talking about in terms of some of the winners in COVID, and I'm sure there must be losers as well. But from a market perspective, is it a hotter market where are those food distribution companies, for example, are they trying to expand and move? Is that being offset by companies who are contracting? Like how are the puzzle pieces working from a space perspective with these industries doing better and worse?
Well, it's a great comment, Michael. And I think one of the things that we've also noticed, everyone really evaluated their supply chain when, come March, everything hit. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit when we were talking with you guys in one of your sales meetings was, sort of the China factor. Everyone was very heavily involved in terms of getting products made and delivered from China. And that obviously had an impact. When China shut down, and they were earlier than we were, it showed people that there was a heavy reliance, and maybe that was something that they wanted to diversify away from. So, a lot of people started anticipating manufacturing coming back to, a lot closer to the shores of North America. So I think, Mexico will definitely, and we've seen this, has been a beneficiary of that. We'll see some more manufacturing being done. A client of ours is actually winding down manufacturing here in Canada because, I would say that they're a bit of a loser in this one. But Mexico will be the beneficiary of that because of the labor, and they're trying to get away from doing all of their production or a large portion of their production in China. So I think we've seen the rise in PP&E. It has been another one where production for that, people want things sourced locally. I read an interesting article where it was the hospitals of Alberta, and it was just basically they had a very poor supply chain, but they ended up with almost too much supply, and then the pandemic hit, and it was one of those things where it showed it didn't matter where those gloves and masks were made, it mattered they were on the shelves of those hospitals. So they took that and oversupply. It really showed us that, even if stuff's coming from China, it's when you're ordering, it's how often you're ordering, it's how often you're resupplying. And again, that gets back into your whole supply chain model. So I think that's the one thing that if people hadn't looked at their model now, and people were sort of looking at that as a 2, 3, 4-year plan, and now it's definitely a 12 to 18 month plan. Anyone that wasn't doing direct to consumer, I think is now looking at doing that. I mean, whether it's, getting away from a third party logistics, look at Amazon, they've done phenomenal through all of this. They've leased several million square feet in our market, several more in Ottawa, very active in Quebec as well. And they just keep chugging along because again, people want things, they want their products, they want to go to one source and they want it delivered right to their door. So,
well, that's, Adam, I think that's what's so interesting about, about one of the reasons Mike and I wanted to talk with you today. You know, for those of you who don't know, Adam and I have been working together now for, I guess, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was first getting into the industry, I would talk to you about industrial sales and leasing. And, you know, even now I'll poke fun. I would just say, oh, well, what's the clear height? How many dock level doors does it have?
How many
like
doors,
this kind of being a smart aleck. And, you know, the technology and the shift in your business over the last, particularly 5 years, has really been remarkable. Like we always talk on the office side about how much technology we can bring to the table, how much we can help our clients. The shift in the office market has probably been slower in terms of technology than it has been on the industrial side, particularly when you talk about supply chain and everything.
I think there's, you know, e-commerce has driven that. I think pharma has driven that. You know, obviously, you know, I mean, people are you know, a lot of the big drug companies. I mean, and again, I think there's going to be a winner out of this in that regard. You know, some big Canadian pharma companies are obviously looking for, you know, but the reality is people are looking for temperature controlled warehouse space because, you know, some drugs need to be stored, you know, that way and distributed to pharmacies. I mean, you know, what's the one thing we all needed when we got locked down? We needed food and we needed our medication, you know, and those became essential services, and we realized how important those were. So you wanted to fill your prescriptions and, you know, head to Shoppers or Rexall, and those two companies needed their drugs. So I think that it's really, you know, certainly in the last 5 to 7 years, I've noticed, you know, the level of service we're providing. The other big factor that we talk about, guys, I mean, I told you how tight our market is. You know, we talk less now about, you know, what's available. I mean, you can count that on your left hand. It's about labor. You know, labor and transportation are the two biggest costs for our clients. You know, on the, you know, in a distribution company, that typically, you know, makes up about 80% of the bucket of costs. You know, real estate is sort of anywhere from 3 to 5%. So even the best agent in the world, if you're saving someone 10 to 55% bucket, is that really a big savings when, you know, labor and solving for the right location and making sure you have employees in the warehouse? I mean, you know, I had a client that was deemed an essential service. He couldn't get a third shift. He makes oatmeal in Vaughan, and he literally could not get enough people during COVID. He was having to pay sort of, you know, minimum wage plus. It was that critical to him because he had to hit all of his, you know, supply deadlines to grocery stores, to, you know, to different companies. So it's been a really interesting shift for us in terms of the services that we have to provide our clients, because I think that that they need to and impacts their real estate.
One thing I'm curious about a bit is market segmentation. So if you're thinking from our viewers' perspective, is there certain stuff in the market that is more likely to be available and other things that you're never going to find that get in line, be it different types of product or different areas of the city that has more or less demand?
It's a great question, Michael. I think one of the things that when I first got into, you know, all of the, you know, our colleagues in the U.S. kept saying to us, it's like, well, how do you not have a construction boom? You know, how does a market get as tight as ours right now? Why weren't you building? The challenge 10 years ago is, you know, to build a shiny brand new building for industrial, you were probably going to get anywhere from sort of $625 to $6.50 a square foot net for a new building. But the existing A-class sort of 20-year-old buildings were trading at $595. So there really wasn't a big incentive for developers to go out and build because land was expensive, and you know, people were, you know, are you going to pay 25 cents more to move? Then we started noticing a real flight to quality, you know, 5 and 6 years ago. One of the big shifts for us was, you know, clear height. You know, Matt and I always joked about it, but, you know, at 36-foot clear, you can rack, you know, usually, you know, 6 high, and then there was here and things like that. So, you know, the U.S. Started building a more modern spec, and, you know, third-party logistics companies, they started to be able to take advantage of that. You're paying on the surface area, not the volume. So there started to be a benefit. Rental rates started to go, developers to build more. And, you know, tenants ended up ultimately having to pay more. So they had to evaluate, you know, whether or not they could stay with their sort of second generation space, if you will. So one of the things that we're finding now is, you know, to your question, Michael, there isn't a lot of new coming to the market, you know, available. We've got, as of the second quarter, we had 10.2 million square feet in the pipeline in terms of development, but almost 8.5 million of that was pre-leased. So, getting that building to market, I mean, if it's not leased by the time you get to market, there must be a real challenge with it. So
Adam, just sorry to interject, because I think this is interesting particularly because we've talked a lot about downtown leasing, obviously, on this show, or podcast or video chat, fireside chat, whatever you want to call it. And, one of the things, I think this sounds exactly like what Mike and I were saying a few weeks ago. There's 10 million square feet of new office space coming downtown. We're at 87% pre-leased. You almost word for word are the same thing on the industrial market. I think the thing that's maybe nuanced between the two markets is it takes 36 months to 40 months to build an office tower downtown, and an industrial building is probably 6 to 12 months before it's up and ready to go.
Depending on when you time it, you can do that in sort of 9-10 months. If you have sort of an early spring, and there's less that goes into it. Obviously, it's not easy, but I mean, certainly you can get that done and have your tenant in for fixturing, within the year. So
which is, and I think that's one of the reasons that market hasn't increased as much. I mean, the demand's there, the supply can just so quickly hit the market. But the one nuanced thing I would say between maybe the downtown office leasing market and the industrial market is obviously it's going out. To build new on the industrial side, it seems like everything just keeps getting farther and farther away from, whether that's CN Rail, whether that's Pearson Airport, whether that's, the heart of, call it a Mississauga or closer to the GTA. Do you think the next wave is going to be older buildings in Mississauga being torn down and being built back up? Or do you think it's going to continue to grow into markets that, like a Bolton, like a Caledon, that weren't markets 5 years ago?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be a bit of both. I mean, to hedge my answer here, but I mean, I think that with development charges, going up, having development charge credits, in markets that were more established, like the Mississaugas and the Bramptons of the world, we're seeing people, looking at redevelopment, if you will, taking a low site coverage, building that's, sort of 30, 40 years old, knocking it down, and then, putting up something new, because of the location. That's as in demand as trying to find, sort of 40 or 50 acres out in Milton or, Caledon. And, you've got a lot of people competing for that. You've got institutional developers, you've got your typical fee developers or traditional developers. And then you've got tenants as well. You've got tenants that are, out there chasing that kind of land. So it becomes very competitive on that landscape. So I think that, it's been both. Land pricing has gone up exponentially over the last 4 or 5 years. In some areas getting, $2 million an acre when 10 years ago, if you could get, $500,000 or $600,000 an acre, it was a fantastic, price for land, and that's, those days are long gone. So I think that it's both, Matt. I think, we're going to have a couple of projects right now where, again, on the surface, it looks like we're selling sort of a shoddy old 30-year-old building, but effectively it's a land play for a lot of the users or developers that are looking at it.
Well, I think the interesting nuance that you just talked about is, and I think one of the most interesting transactions you've ever told me about is one you did a year or two ago, where you're actually purchasing the land on behalf of the tenant, working with them to construct their own building to then go do essentially a future sale or a forward sale. And on the office side, we're not really, it's just that it's not that nuanced where you're going to go buy your own land to build your own office tower at a size downtown where it makes sense. But I think it's just, you have so many people competing for the same space and the same dirt. It's fascinating.
And you know what, companies have realized, we're very fortunate on this call to work with a lot of the sort of the top Fortune 500 companies. I think a lot of those companies have become more sophisticated in their approach to real estate. They understand the value or the currency of their covenant. And, strong covenant, we'll trade. And, we did that on behalf of, DSV, which is the third largest, 3PL in the world. And, they took that approach globally. They've done it 6 or 7 times in Europe. They've done it, twice in the US, and they've grown by acquisition, several times. And it was a large consolidation, but their attitude was, hey, you know what, we think, having us as a tenant for 10 or 15 years is a really good thing. So we're going to build the building exactly the way we want it. And we're going to sell this. And we used our, our friends in the capital markets group to help us on the back end. But yeah, effectively, we found them, a piece of dirt. We helped them organize the RFP for the builders. And again, I think 10 years ago, that's not something that, a lot of tenants were sophisticated enough to do here. Certainly not a lot of brokers were recommending. And, that's been a real shift in our business in terms of what we need to know and provide as a service to our clients.
Is there any relief in sight? In the office world, you hope the new towers come online and it'll relieve some of the supply constraint. In your market, there's no other land. What do you tell a tenant? Like, when is it going to get any better? When will it get better?
Well, and it's a great point. Like, so to make matters even worse, Michael, we actually had our provincial government shut down construction that was non-essential service. It was funny. A lot of the developers were clamoring, saying that, these tenants were essential services, and, some of them were fortunate enough to be able to keep building, but effectively had like almost a 2-month development. So, we have all this pent up demand. We've got developers sort of scrambling to try and satisfy that. And then they're told they've got to push pause on their developments for 2 months, which, it happened in the spring. Developments that were coming in the third and really the fourth quarter, which is unfortunate. So yeah, now what we're telling clients is that there's really no relief in the near term, sort of in the next 6 to 12 months. So, what we're telling people is you've got to start this process very early. 5 years ago, if I was able to get someone to look at their, at least 6 to 9 months in advance when their notification from their lease was coming up, that was great. Now we're working on projects sort of 2.5 years in advance because you have to, and a lot of people are sort of saying, well, how do you bridge that gap? It's not like we're going to sign a lease, but there's a lot of things that we have to do to get approvals from the tenant side to then go out into the market. So it's a challenge. It's a real balancing act. It's tough for developers. They're buying land at extremely sort of record highs, and they want to develop a building, have it built, and have it pre-leased, and turn over the keys once the building's finished. So it's put our tenants in a real bind. So we're starting to work with them a lot earlier than we normally would. Yeah. Matt and I were on a call was it 2 weeks ago, with a tenant that's got an expiry we're just not used to talking that early, but the reality is they're going to go for an approval some point at the end of this year, so that next year we can start looking at securing space for them with a developer that's going to be building, and with the hopes that we can time it so that come sort of end of 21, start of 22, they're going to be transitioning to their new building. So basically it's just pushed everything forward, Michael, because there's certainly no relief in sight for the next 12 to 18 months. We're sort of predicting in 2022 that their development might be able to catch up a little bit, but it's tough. It's tough out there.
It's unreal. Mike, I think we're, I don't want to take a ton more time just because I think Adam's really talked about a lot of interesting things. So we could take this in a lot of
like
interesting
15, 20 more questions.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. It's so funny. Like and Adam and I have joked about this for years. We'll get on calls and we're lucky enough to work together on quite a few assignments, and we'll jump on and Adam will say things, about the office market, and I'll say things about, tell us about clear height, tell us about truck level doors, and is that a T8 light? Big deal. But it's, I've learned a ton today just in the 25 minutes, really like listening and digging into your marketplace, Adam. It's been fascinating. Last question, I'll put you on the spot here quickly. At least last question from me. I know Mike's probably got a bunch. 2-story warehouses. How long until they're in the GTA?
One of those off my list. I had that question too.
It was really popular conversation, pre-COVID. I'm told, and we've worked with a couple of different architects that, one that's, Oxford Properties is doing one in Vancouver right now. Yeah. A lot of people knew about the one that was done by Prologis that was actually existing in Seattle. There's another one being done in New Jersey. I'm told for the numbers to work, you got to be pricing land at about $2 3/4 to almost $3 million an acre.
Wow.
I don't think it's there yet.
No.
If you think of Vancouver, it's a really geographically constrained market. The mountains, and then you've got sort of government controlled agricultural land that gets released, periodically. So, we talked about redevelopment, and that's the kind of thing that gets done, a lot more there. They've got a much tighter downtown. So I think that short answer, Matt, I think it's coming, but not yet. But it's not that far off.
You can see Mike and I read the same article, which is the only article we've probably read on industrial leasing in the last 24 months. So it caught our eyes. Adam, I think, thanks for joining us today. That was incredibly insightful. I think a lot of people who have been watching this over the last few months will actually gain a lot of interest and at least education from that. That was eye-opening to I think myself and probably Michael as well. So
there's lots of opportunities for us to collaborate, and we hope we can do more of that in the future.
Yeah, just to give you the last word, just last question in 10 seconds or less, your advice for a tenant who wants industrial space. Points.
Read your lease, call JLL, and years ago.
Yeah, start early. That's awesome. Well, Adam, like always, thanks so much. Great to chat with you. Be well. And for everyone out there who was able to watch again this week, thanks so much for your support as always. Drop us a line, hit us up on email. We can happily share Adam's contact info as well. If there's any follow-up questions, I'm sure he'd love to answer them. So until next time, thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, Adam.